Recording in progress.
Okay, wow. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. All of you here in this room with us, all of you in the sanctuary here at Trinity Lime Rock Church, and all of you on Zoom. I'm very excited to have the Attorney General here with us, and I know we're all eager to hear what he has to say. I want to welcome you on behalf of Trinity's rector, Heidi Truax, who would be here welcoming you, but she is running the Zoom in the church. So give her a big round of applause. Heidi and her congregation have warmly embraced what we're doing at Vecinos Seguros, not just this time, but years ago when retired Reverend John Carter first created Vecinos Seguros during the first Trump administration. Heidi is an amazing partner, and we heartily thank her for all that she's doing. And I also want to thank all the Vecinos Seguros Steering Committee volunteers who brought this evening together. You can recognize them because we're all wearing name tags. As we arrive here to hear our State Representative Maria Horn and our State Attorney General William Tong, a proud U.S. citizen by birthright, I ask that we pause for a moment, just a moment of silence, to just sort of center ourselves here and to send loving community energy out to all of our neighbors, especially those who are unfairly and immorally targeted by a president who cares only about himself. Can't hear.
I think if you slow your speech, or if everyone who's using the mic can just enunciate more, but it's completely impossible to understand, unfortunately, for everyone in the other room.
Okay, but when we tested it today, it worked. Okay, thank you. Okay, I would also like to welcome Sandra Arena, the Special Associate Attorney General. And Lori Fernand of the Attorney General staff, and thank you all. Thank you all for making the trek up here during mud season. Tonight's event is hosted by Vecinos Seguros Dos. It's a grassroots group dedicated to educating our community about immigrant rights and connecting those targeted for deportation with the resources and information that they may need to protect themselves and their families here in the northwest corner, as well as across the border in Massachusetts and New York State. We have formed a rapid response team to document any ICE incidents in the area and have developed relationships with groups like ours in the nearby regions. You will see that there were cards on your chairs. If you have questions for the Attorney General or State Representative Horn, please write your questions on the cards, and we'll give them after the Attorney General's speech to an usher who will bring them up to Lee DeBoer, our moderator for the evening. Thank you, Lee. We won't be taking any direct questions from the floor because they're difficult for those online to hear. And if anyone in Zoom land has a question, you can type it into the chat, and I'll try to monitor for that. But we're going to try to get out of here by 7:15, so we may not have time for all the questions. So if you have any cell phones, if you could please silence them. If you're on Zoom, if you could please mute yourself. And I'd like to introduce our State Representative, Maria Horn. Thank you so much.
Extended to all of you. I want to make sure we do thank Jill, Vecinos Seguros, the Trinity Lime Rock Church, everyone who has been part of this outpouring of support for those in our community who are most targeted at this moment. We are all less safe today than we were 6.5 weeks ago, no matter how you measure it. financially, global security, public safety, healthcare, you name it. And I have spent myself today trying to come up with responses to things like, federal cuts to Medicaid and things like that. So I think we all feel this in some way or other, but you all made the commitment and the sacrifice to be here tonight to make sure that we do something about protecting those in our community who are our neighbors, with whom we work, with whom we live, who we care about, and we want to make sure that they are protected and that they feel that they are cared for by their community. As we are all feeling this sort of onslaught of insecurity and chaos, we do have one considerable, not several, but we have one particular considerable weapon in our arsenal, and that is our Attorney General. We knew was a fighter for us when he was elected, and I imagine he's fighting in all kinds of ways that he perhaps did not anticipate. He has been at the forefront of fights on behalf of Connecticut families since his election, and certainly in the last few weeks in terms of funding freezes, research on healthcare, protecting immigrants, you name it. William Tong's name has been at the top of that list as he has emerged as a national leader, really ensuring that states like Connecticut stand up for our values, who we are, and who we are going to be in the future. So we are really privileged to have you with us here this evening, my friend, Attorney General Tong.
You guys are so lucky to have Maria Horn. You're not. Yeah. She's a former federal prosecutor, and I am so lucky she has no plans to run against me. We're also very lucky that for a long time, Roberta Willis did a great job. Yeah. And thank you, Jill, and Vecinos Seguros, and Trinity Lime Rock Church for hosting us here tonight. Let's give everyone So I don't normally like to stand behind a microphone, but I think there's this thing's called an owl, and we have people online, and so I can't move around and do my Oprah Donahue thing. So I'm just going to have to stand here. Let me start by saying I have some important news to share. As you may know, we, the states, sued the federal government when the Office of Management and Budget and the President tried to freeze all federal funding. That was the second Monday of this new administration. I sued on Tuesday. We got a temporary restraining order on Friday. We now have a preliminary injunction to stop this president from continuing to break the law. Also, Super Bowl weekend, you may know that the outrage of that weekend was that the president tried to freeze all federal funding through the National Institutes of Health, which I don't have to tell you is extraordinarily dangerous. Right? Not only does it cut off funding for cancer research, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, heart disease, mental health, but of course, didn't we just come out of a global pandemic that killed 1 million people in this country, more than 10,000 people in this state? There's no way without the NIH that we could develop a vaccine as quickly as we did again, if it happened again. And so Super Bowl weekend, we ran into court again. We got a temporary restraining order today. We got a preliminary injunction stopping them from breaking the law and stopping NIH funding too. So, I have said, I've tried to put this in perspective because it's kind of hard sometimes for us lawyers, especially in this moment. I said to the Senate President today, who's a lawyer, he thanked me and my fellow attorneys general for all of our work, and I said, Marty, you know we're in tough shape when all we've got are the lawyers and the judges. But sometimes we talk in law talk, and I'm going to do some of that tonight. I'm sure there are a bunch of lawyers here, people went to law school in the audience. And we talk about rule of law and constitutional crisis and Article 1, Article 2, and sometimes that sort of gets lost in how it applies to us every single day and why it matters. And so I've said everybody in this room, every middle schooler in Connecticut and across America knows about checks and balances, right? Checks and balances are important to stop people from breaking the law, to stop the president, to stop Congress from doing something that's wrong, that's unlawful, and that makes us unsafe and less free. We need checks and balances, because without checks and balances, you have a president with unchecked power. And when you have a president with unchecked power, Congress becomes optional. Rights become optional. States become optional. And so what we're doing right now is I and we are a check on this president. And so one of the areas in which we are really serving as really the only check on this president, because there's so much hatred and misinformation and disinformation out there. One of the places in which we're really the only people doing the work of protecting our friends and neighbors and our family is in the war on America's immigrants. That's what it is. It's a war on America's immigrants and immigrant families. Jill started by saying she wanted to center us in where we are tonight and what we're doing. So let me also center all of us in what this means to me and all of you. So when I was a kid, I grew up in West Hartford, and I went to elementary school at a place called Whiting Lane School in West Hartford, Connecticut. Some of you may know it. It's a local neighborhood school. And I remember when the first kids started showing up from Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, right? Their families were resettled in West Hartford. And I'm the son of immigrants. My parents ran a Chinese restaurant at that time. We were doing pretty good then, actually. And so I remember being in this local West Hartford public school, and these kids that sort of looked like me, but didn't sound like me, started showing up. And frankly, I was like the only game in town. I was like the only Asian kid, and then all these other Asian kids showed up. Right? And I remember distinctly thinking, these kids are refugees, and I'm the son of immigrants. And that somehow there was a difference between me and them. And I felt in that time, my 6-year-old, 7-year-old self, that I was somehow better than them, right? Because they're refugees, and I am the son and grandson of immigrants. In the fullness of time, and in learning more about my family and our experience of being a part of that experience, of course, I realized that what the hell are we doing here in Hartford, Connecticut, my family? Why was I born in Hartford Hospital? Of all places, how did my parents end up meeting in Bloomfield? In a Chinese restaurant in Bloomfield. It's because my grandparents and my dad ran for their lives. From Japanese, from the communists, at a time when 14 to 20 million Chinese and Koreans were slaughtered during World War II, depending on how you count. And so I've come to understand, like many people in this room, if you think about how your people came here, yes, I am the son and grandson of immigrants, but I am nothing if not the son and grandson of refugees. And that's true for a lot of people in this room. So let's start there. right? There's not any daylight between me and those Vietnamese, Cambodian, and Laotian kids that showed up in the 1970s. And there's not a lot of daylight between me and the immigrants who are here today. Why do I say that? Because, again, if you reflect on who you are and how you got here, back in Trump 1.0, remember he started talking crazy talk, which now, you know, in the MAGAverse has become legitimate. He talked about denaturalizing American citizens. And it occurred to me that he was talking about my parents and my grandparents. And then he started attacking anchor babies, the American-born children of immigrants. And then I realized he's talking about me, right? And so on the first night of this new presidency, at about 8 o'clock, he issued an executive order to ban birthright citizenship, which I don't have to tell you is utterly, brazenly unconstitutional. Okay, you don't even have to get beyond the terms of the 14th Amendment. It says if you're born on American soil, you're an American citizen, period, full stop. There's no discussion, there's no interpretation. If you're an originalist, a textualist, that's what the words say. And he issued that order on Monday. We sued on Tuesday. And this is a really personal battle for me and for so many people. Because, as Jill said, I'm an American by right of my birth in Hartford Hospital. I'm not an American because I derived my citizenship from my parents. I'm an American because of the 14th Amendment. And it's because of the 14th Amendment, and we can go into this later, and the origins of the 14th Amendment in slavery and the Civil War, but it's because of the 14th Amendment and birthright citizenship that my life is possible. Because my parents knew, they had certainty that when I was born, that I was of this place. I was rooted in this place. They couldn't take that away from me. So my parents were then free, liberty, right? Remember that? They were free to sign a lease, to buy a house, to open a Chinese restaurant, to open another Chinese restaurant, to work 7 days a week, 15 hours a day, right? They gave everything because they knew it would count. Can you imagine if we didn't know where we would be? You couldn't really do any of that. And so that's why we sued. And I was in federal court when we were arguing with Massachusetts and New Jersey for a preliminary injunction to stop this president from banning birthright citizenship. We got a temporary restraining order. We now have a preliminary injunction. Check on this president. So I want to get to questions, but I know you want to hear about immigration broadly. Let me just remind everybody, all of you know this. You know, sometimes you have to joke about things because otherwise, you know, it's too much. So I've said a number of times that America runs on two things: Dunkin' and immigrant workers. Right? There's no America. There's no northwest corner. There's no restaurants in Torrington, right, without immigrant workers, and a lot of them undocumented. There's no economy. If you want to wreck America's economy tomorrow, you know, you deport 15 to 20 million people. You don't even have to get that far. You deport 1 million people, you're going to wreck America's economy. And so that's why there are a lot of really important reasons, ethical, moral reasons, but there are also really important structural and economic issues why immigrants are so important all of us and to our community and our state, which is why it is the policy and the state of Connecticut. Let me just be clear, as your Attorney General, okay? It is the policy of the state of Connecticut to respect, honor, and protect immigrants and immigrant families, period. That's what the policy is, that's what the law says. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about the law. But let me say, I know we're going to have a lot of questions about what happens if this happens, what happens if that happens. You'll probably have questions about the Trust Act. Let me do constitutional law in 1 minute. Okay? This is, ready, Maria?
I'm ready.
Okay. You can check me if I'm wrong.
I wish I did the constitutional law.
Yeah.
I would have saved a lot of time.
Constitutional law in 1 minute. This is the sovereign state of Connecticut, right?
Yep.
Okay. What does that mean? That means that Connecticut is independent of the 49 other states. We get to have our own governor, our own legislature, our own attorney general, our own cities and towns, our own laws. You know, it's why Massachusetts can't come down from the north tonight and enforce its law on all of us here, or New York from the west, because Connecticut is sovereign. We get to live the way we want to live. Connecticut joined with 49 other states in a federation by our consent. Okay? The federation is known as the United States of America. Good. So far, we're good. If they failed that, I'd be out of here. So we're joined together by our consent in a federation known as the United States of America, and we delegated limited powers to the federal government. And the Constitution says we reserved everything else that hasn't been delegated to the federal government to ourselves. That's the 10th Amendment, right? And, by the way, what does the Dobbs decision say? Horrible decision. I abhor the decision. But what does it say? It says states' rights, right? We Democratic AGs tried to call it progressive federalism, but it didn't take. States' rights. So states are the original building blocks of this country, and we have the prerogative. We delegated limited powers to the federal government. Here's the problem. One of those powers is over immigration. Why? Because it makes sense in a rational world with a rational law-abiding president that the states say, we need the federation to handle foreign affairs, national security, and immigration. That is the design of the system. Which is why immigration and customs enforcement, which is why the federal government have broad authority. So this is the real top part of the evening. They have broad authority over immigration. They don't have the right to violate our constitutional rights, okay? But they have a lot of power because the states entrusted that power to the federal government. However, it doesn't mean that the federal government can do whatever they want. They can't break the law, they can't violate our constitutional rights, and they can't come to Connecticut and tell us to do their job for them. And so the Trust Act, does everybody know what the Trust Act is? Okay, the Trust Act is a law that was passed actually under President Obama. Okay, there was a concern under President Obama about a program called Secure Communities. And there were a lot of detentions and deportations then. What's fair is fair. Okay, there were a lot, and many of you might have been activated during that period. Okay, there were a lot of detentions and deportations during President Obama's presidency. And so in reaction to that, Connecticut passed the Trust Act. And the Trust Act stands for what I think is an unremarkable proposition. Okay, federal government, you do your job, we'll do our job. If people, immigrant families, are worried about their immigration status, And they're worried that if they call the police or the fire department, that they're putting themselves at risk, they lose trust with law enforcement. And how can you run a police department that way? How can you promote public safety if people are afraid to call 911? Or the fire department if their house is on fire? People have to be able to rely on and have trust and faith with local law enforcement. And so we said, we're not going to let the federal government commandeer, that's a constitutional concept, they're not allowed to commandeer state and local law enforcement for immigration enforcement, because it's not our job, it's their job. That's what Trust Act says. That's all it says. So I'm happy to answer questions about that, but that's the key interplay between state and local government. I mean, federal and state government and local government. Let me close with, if I may, a quick story. I mentioned before that birthright citizenship is the reason why I'm standing here. Without it, I'm not here. I'm definitely not your Attorney General. My dad came to this country in the early 1970s, and he came here on a tourist visa. And he met my mom in the Hong Kong kitchen on Blue Hills Avenue in Bloomfield. No shit, that's a true story. He was a cook, and my mom was sort of a customer, sort of working the register, going to Hartford Public High, and they got together and decided to make a life together. They opened a Chinese restaurant on Park Street in Hartford. And one day, we think a rival Chinese restaurant owner literally dropped a dime on my dad. This young man in the front has no idea what that means. It's a payphone, young man. And a dime is a form of currency. So we think they dropped a dime on my dad. And an INS agent showed up, who was a customer, believe it or not, and said, "Mr. Tong, we know that you're on a tourist visa. That tourist visa is about to expire. You're going to have to leave. And if you don't leave, we're going to have to deport you." So my dad had, a complicated immigration story, like many people. And like many households, 70% of households in this country right now, where there's somebody who's undocumented or has a complicated immigration story, there are other people in the household who have legal status or who are citizens, including American citizen children. So my mom and my dad talked about it, and they planned to pack up and leave and go back to Canada, where my dad had gone to school. So one night, my dad's driving home on the Berlin Turnpike, and he decides, I'm not going to go out like that, right? I came this far, ran for my life from, post-war China. I made it all the way here. I met this girl, opened a restaurant. We're doing well. I can't give up like that. So he went back to their apartment. I think it was in Newington. And he wrote a 6-page handwritten letter to the President of the United States. And he put it in the mail, snail mail, with a stamp on it. And that president's name was Richard Nixon. And so he put that letter in the mail, and he thought, that's it, I'm done, I'm cooked, right? That's it, we're going to have to leave. So shortly before they were going to voluntarily self-deport, that same INS agent came back to my parents' restaurant, and he said, the president received your letter. We welcome you to this country. You have to go to the back of the line and wait your turn, but please stay. So That's not my story, that's my dad's story. But why do I tell you that story? Because I am asked often in this moment, and there are dark moments. There have been several dark moments today, I'll be candid, in our work in the Office of the Attorney General. People ask me in this moment, William, what gives you hope? What gives me hope is that in one generation, I went from that Chinese restaurant to being the Attorney General of this state. That is still true right now. There are children, there are kids of immigrant parents, some undocumented, some with complicated status, one citizen mother, one undocumented father, all different shapes and sizes. There are kids in this area, families, who are living this dream right now. But they need us to fight for them so they can keep it. Thank you.
Thank you for the fight, Attorney General. Thank you. Oh, you deserve it.
Okay, we're going to try to, we have had cards out on your seats if you had a question, and you can get them to one of our folks who may have been picking them up. They're going to try to get them up to me. But in the meantime, some questions have already come up to the floor. One of them is...
Step closer to the mic.
If one is a small business owner, a farmer, or an individual who employs undocumented workers, what do you need to be thinking about now? What do they need to be thinking about now to support employees and to protect themselves?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. So, I'm often asked by people, what can I do right now? And I think that they're asking me in terms of how can I be active? How can I advocate for people? How can I speak up? You should do all of those things. But what I say first of all is take care of each other. Okay? And this applies to a small business person or a neighbor. The first thing I would say is don't put anybody at risk. Okay? So for the advocates and activists in this room, and I'm one of them, maybe in 2017 we might have said, this is my friend, he's undocumented, he's wonderful, he does so much for our community, we want to save him. And we would put my friend on TV, like at a press conference. We don't do that anymore. No, seriously, right? If you want to speak up, you should speak up on behalf of people, but don't name them, don't point to them, don't tell anybody where they live. People should keep their head down, right? And focus on taking care of their family. If you run a business, let me just say, because I have to, as the Attorney General, I'm the state's lawyer, okay? And so I got to be careful in how I provide legal advice and to whom I provide legal advice, because I have only one client, and that's the state of Connecticut. So I want to be clear that I'm not providing legal advice to anybody here. You need to get your own legal advice. What I think you should do if you own a small business or run a school or run a town is speak to your lawyers, right? And if they're not expert in these matters, find somebody that is, and understand what your plan is, okay? What do I mean by that? Well, there are family preparedness plans that advocates and activists are handing out. There are Know Your Rights documents. You can get those from Iris in New Haven.
Next year.
Oh, over there, okay. Over there. So consult those documents, but don't just take their word for it. Figure out, everybody has to make their own risk assessment for themselves, their business, their family, right? People that depend on them. and how much risk you're willing to tolerate. And how much risk the people in your care are willing to tolerate. It's up to them too, right? And they have children, they have people depending on them as well. So you need to figure out where everybody's at. But come up with a plan. What happens if ICE shows up at your office? Okay? What I would say, without giving legal advice, what I would say is have a protocol and make sure that whoever receives people at the front door knows who to call right away in case ICE shows up. I wouldn't leave it to the front desk person, who's usually not a lawyer, right? And usually not a position of authority to make the call on their own. I would say have that person equipped with the first 5 phone numbers that they should call if somebody shows up, because, right, someone's not going to be around or won't pick up, so there should be redundancy. So you should have a list of people that that person would call, and then that person would call a person of authority, right, who would understand what the policy of the organization is. And if I were running a business, I would have that person come out and greet ICE and say, "May I see your warrant?" Okay? And if they say, "I don't have one," you can say, "Thank you, this is private property. I would ask you to please leave." Politely. Okay? Remember, these are federal agents. Nobody should put themselves in harm's way unnecessarily. If they produce a warrant, the person who's interfacing should be trained to say, "Is this a judicial warrant signed by a judge?" Right? Let me see the signature. And if they can produce a judicial warrant, in general terms, ICE has the power and authority to apprehend somebody if they have a warrant for somebody. So those are some basic guidelines, and it's important to talk through all of that if it happens. If you're a family, or you know a family, and we're not talking about a business, we're talking about just people, what should they do? First of all, they should continue to live their lives. Okay? Their kids should go to school. They should go to work. They should run their small businesses. A lot of them, by the way, run businesses and employ people, like my dad did. Okay? So people should continue to live their lives, but have a plan. One thing I've said to parents is you need to have the talk with your kids, especially your teenagers. Don't do anything foolish right now. I know it's hard. I have teenagers. I was a teenager once. Be smart, okay? Now is not the time to take unnecessary risks. And then for that family and for Vecinos Seguros and everybody supporting those families, you should know who the first 5 calls are. And that person should know who the first 5 calls are. And if you don't have a list of 5 lawyers who are willing to represent people pro bono, you need one. Okay? And candidly, at this point, yes, we want people who are expert in immigration, but you need all the help you can get. And so I would go out and find people who are willing to stand with you and support you and provide pro bono legal services to people that need them.
Two questions came up about specific statuses. One is, are green card holders vulnerable to ICE? And the second one was clarifying the rhetoric, if you could, on, quote, criminal undocumented immigrants and their status.
Yeah. So I'll get to that in a second. First of all, yes, green card holders have legal status and should otherwise be safe and in good shape. And their rights as green card holders, legal permanent residents, should be respected by ICE and law enforcement. However, okay, here's the 2 caveats. Number 1 is the president and his minions, and I say that because in many ways the minions are more dangerous than the president. J.D. Vance is more dangerous than Donald Trump. We all know this, right? Because he knows better. And I'll get to that in a second. But the minions have said that they're considering rolling back legal status for people that didn't lawfully acquire it in the first place. So there's some theory that people who came after a certain date under President Biden somehow didn't acquire the legal status that they have because it was illegitimate. Now that has not really been put into action yet, but that's a risk. I'm just giving you an honest response, an answer. That's a risk. I don't think we're going to get there. I will sue if they try to do that, but it's out there. Okay, that's a theory that they're peddling. The other thing is, remember what I said about mixed status households. In 70% of households in which there's an undocumented person, there are people of mixed status, usually green card holders or American citizen children. So the point I have made from the very beginning, especially around birthright, is that it's not at all easy to take all the undocumented people and put them off to the side and ship them out, because everybody's mixed. And so if you attack an undocumented person, if you go after him or her, you go after their whole family. You disrupt the whole family. You impact the whole family, including someone with a green card. What was the second part of the question? Sorry.
The second card was criminal.
Oh, okay, so this is total horseshit, right? So let's just be clear. There's no evidence, obviously, that immigrants commit crime at any greater rate than non-immigrants or citizens. Are there some horrific stories? Sure. Yes, they're terrible. If you commit a violent crime in Connecticut, if you commit any crime at all, frankly, you should be arrested and prosecuted, and if appropriate, incarcerated. If you commit a violent crime in Connecticut, you should be arrested, prosecuted, incarcerated, and if appropriate, deported. Period. Because nobody here wants to protect violent criminals. Nobody is saying that. Nobody. But it's the other side is trying to say that all of us want to shield gang members and violent criminals. Nobody wants to do that, and that is not what the Trust Act says. So if you hear that kind of rhetoric, you need to push back on it. And in fact, you know, if you talk to people from immigrant communities and why the Trust Act is so important, they want public safety. They want law enforcement. They want strong protections. They don't want people who are violent any more than anybody else does.
We are aware of undocumented people who are afraid to access health care,
Yes.
including for mental health and addiction issues, for fear of being, quote, found out, unquote. What would you suggest to allay fears on this front?
So this is a hard one. Like I said before, everybody needs to make their own risk assessment. And somebody in that situation has to figure out for themselves how much risk they're willing to take for themselves and their families. I think what we can do is, if you know specific people, I think what we can do is do some legwork for them and find providers who are willing to respect their humanity, not just their status, right? And are willing, what did I say before about taking care of each other? Willing to take care of people and take care of their neighbors. And I think if you can find healthcare providers or other service providers, financial institutions, people that understand this is a challenging environment and that people are concerned, and direct people to providers who are willing to do what they can to respect and honor their status and not put them at risk, then you should do that. However, I will say this: nobody can guarantee that information is inviolable, and people need to know that. You can't lie to them, right? And they need to know that if they do go to a healthcare provider, even if that healthcare provider is really committed to helping and protecting, that person or that family, that ICE could show up and through whatever legal process get access to names and information.
Attorney General, I want to just ask a question from the Zoom.
Yeah.
So this is from Deirdre DeCara, who directs the Fish Homeless Shelter in Torrington. We were told yesterday that providers can no longer knowingly refer undocumented immigrants into programs that are federally funded, such as permanent supported housing. And if undocumented immigrants have already been housed, staff need to work on exit strategies, as they will no longer receive any long-term housing assistance. Meaning, all of these immigrants will be homeless on the streets. It appears all undocumented immigrants will be deported, not just criminals? Question mark.
This crowd is capable of great cruelty, right? And so this should come as no surprise. And yes, the implications of what you just read can be severe and draconian and awful. Here's what I've said to people about this moment where we are. We may be able to go to court and stop them at various points, and we may ultimately prevail. I hope that we will. I believe that we will, in some global sense, but a lot of people are going to get hurt. A lot of people are getting hurt right now. Okay? I don't know where that directive came from, and I don't know what the source of that authority is, but as I'm hearing it, what I'm most concerned about, maybe somebody in authority gave that direction, okay? But I think what's happening, and this is by design, is a lot of people are acting on imperfect information, right? They're hearing, for example, that the Department of Education has issued an order that if you do any diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging in any school at any level, elementary, middle, high school, college, university, graduate program, if you do anything at all, that you will lose all federal funding. Okay? That's a threat. Nothing has happened yet. Okay? And they haven't denied anybody any funding. And there are other things being said by Tom Homan, for example, right? Worst guy in America, right? So guys like that who feel really tough, right? Fox News, behind their shield of privilege, going after people that are not as well protected as he is, and you know, they're saying things that cause people to react. What I would say to you is, if you run a nonprofit, if you run a business, if you run a school or the town, or you know, if you care for other people, if you hear something or somebody even says something like that to you, we were instructed or we were given direction, you should ask, from whom? And on what basis? And under what power? Well, I don't know, someone just told me. Okay, I can't rely on that. You know, if you are concerned that it's something real, actionable, then you should try to consult with a lawyer to try to drill down on what it is. And this is why I get back to lawyers are expensive. I get back to pro bono lawyers and trying to find volunteers in the community who can offer their time and expertise.
We've had a couple of questions about the Trust Act, and perhaps a couple of these, like Maria, you might also have a word to say on this. One is, you know, is there a possibility of various ways of, is there a possibility of ways of strengthening the Trust Act that you've identified? And is there anything working on that front? Two, what are some of the threats that we are already hearing about in terms of, from the other side, to perhaps weaken the Trust Act? And then I guess finally is, has there ever been a ruling about the Trust Act itself vis-a-vis its preemptibility by the feds? Is that something that we could be seeing in a Supreme Court case sometime soon?
So there's obviously a lot of litigation going on right now about this. We have a video camera and we have a Zoom, so I'm going to be careful about what I say.
What was the question?
The question is about the Trust Act and ways to strengthen it, attempts to weaken it, and what the legal status of the Trust Act is and whether it's subject to challenge. So Illinois and New York have been sued. They have different laws than we do. Remember what I said before about the sovereign state of Connecticut? They're doing their thing, we're doing our thing. Connecticut's law is eminently constitutional. And our United States Court of Appeals, which is in the Second Circuit, has said things in other cases that suggest that our Trust Act stands on very firm ground. And so if anybody wants to challenge our Trust Act, I'm not only prepared to defend it, but I expect we will win, okay? And there are other statutes in other states that look like ours that have also been upheld as being constitutional. The suggestion that we are interfering with federal law and that we are not complying with federal law is wrong. Anytime anybody says that you're acting in defiance of federal law, no, I'm not. The Attorney General, the state of Connecticut, state and local police have no responsibility for federal immigration law enforcement. That's your job. Do your job. If you're not good at your job, don't blame us. Seriously, okay? If there's a violent criminal that you have not apprehended, that's on you. Because if we catch them, we will prosecute them and incarcerate them. So you're going to hear a lot about this. This is why I've said something that makes people a little bit uncomfortable. Don't use the word sanctuary. Okay? Why? People say, oh, Connecticut's a sanctuary state, or we have sanctuary cities. No, we don't. Okay? There is no statute, there is no ordinance that says sanctuary anywhere. Sanctuary, as a word, has no legal meaning, okay? It bears no legal weight or significance because it hasn't been used in our state, okay? And the reason why I counsel against using it is, number one, because it's inflammatory, but also it suggests things that aren't true. It suggests, number one, that somehow we are acting in defiance of federal law or that we are breaking the law. No, we're not, okay? Number two is, it suggests that we can protect everybody from immigration and law enforcement, and that we can protect everybody from being deported. That's also not true, and that misrepresents what we can do, and frankly sets people up where they make bad decisions based on poor information. So that's why it's important not to talk about sanctuary cities and sanctuary states, because it doesn't mean anything. We should just say what we mean, which is that it's the policy of the state to care for each other and care for immigrants and respect, honor, and protect them. Just do what we intend to do. Don't use words that don't help. The final thing I'll say is, yes, there's a long list of things on the Trust Act that people are talking about in the legislature. The legislature's in session now. These things will be debated. There are efforts to repeal the Trust Act. That's ridiculous, okay? But know that our friends, mostly on the Republican side, are seeking a total repeal, which I don't think anybody really supports. And the second thing I'll say is, yeah, I think the way to improve the Trust Act is to strengthen its provisions that reflect its true intent, which is to make sure that law enforcement maintains trust with local communities, and that the state is not somehow brought in to doing federal law enforcement work for the feds when that's their job. So, for example, making sure that all state employees, for example, understand that they're not to assist the federal government in doing their job. They have no obligation to do that, and it is not what they're paid to do. It's not part of their job responsibilities, so they shouldn't do it. So that's one example of an improvement.
Could I ask one question? What about a private right of action? That right now, if ICE does profile somebody and then local law enforcement somehow helps, there's nobody to sue if you know that that's happening.
Yeah. So.
Could you repeat the question?
The question Jill has is private rights of action, which means an individual could sue usually a town or a city or the state for not complying with or abiding by the Trust Act as a mode of enforcement. So, to be fair, as the state's lawyer, I can never advocate giving people the opportunity to sue the state. It's inconsistent with my ethical duties. So let's take the state off the table. Cities and towns are also political subdivisions of the state. It's complicated for me. Let me just say this. It's being debated. This idea has some currency about a private right of action. There's a lot of frustration around enforcement, and so I get it. And I'll leave it to the legislature to figure out whether it makes sense.
Put Maria on a hot seat.
The private right of action, I mean, I sadly don't sit on the Judiciary Committee at the moment, although right now I'm very sad about that. I would just add that with respect to a lot of what William just said about, strengthening the Trust Act and attempts to weaken it, in terms of protecting it, so I was on the Judiciary Committee when we strengthened the Trust Act in 2019, 2020. And I remember that debate. And one thing that I think is, first of all, on the one hand...
That Republicans voted for, by the way.
Exactly, I was going to point out.
Including Rob Sampson.
It is changed, yes, it had tremendous bipartisan support.
Yes.
So on the one hand, you have, this is now obviously a hot button issue that the Republicans have gotten hold of and are using. On the other hand, I can tell you that there are groups throughout the state of Connecticut who are sort of more traditionally conservative groups who want to protect the Trust Act because they have employees who have a variety of different immigration status. Take farmers, for example. I can tell you that the Farm Bureau, which is not usually a way lefty a Democratic group, is very concerned about protecting the Trust Act because they value their agricultural employees. So I don't see, as William just said, a lot of significant threat to the Trust Act, but I know that we'll have lots of debate about strengthening.
Yeah, because, let me just add, and it's hard not to I start to get a little angry about it. You gotta remind people, what are we talking about here? Half of all agricultural workers in this country are undocumented. 50%. Half of all people that work...
Hard to get documented.
Half people, right? Half of all people that work in meatpacking are undocumented. And so I've done a bunch of town halls since the president was reelected, and not every crowd is as polite and handsome as this one. But I've said to people who have gotten a little aggressive about it, I've said, do you like strawberries? Because if you refuse to eat a strawberry, right, or a hamburger that's been touched by undocumented hands, you will never eat a strawberry or hamburger again. If you refuse to eat off of plates that have been washed by undocumented hands, you will never eat in a restaurant in Connecticut again. And sometimes you just gotta push back and let people know how it really impacts them and us. And then, I'm sorry, I've used a couple of profanities tonight. I sound like Chris Murphy. Sorry, Chris. But what I have said in some of my more heated moments is that this shit is going to get real when your 5th grader comes home and says, my best friend's parents are gone and we don't know where they are. Or worse, my best friend is gone and we don't know where they are.
A couple are very similar. What should I do if my lawn service is visited by ICE on my property? What would you do? Would I be putting myself at risk if I housed and cared for an illegal immigrant? What was my position if ICE comes to my home?
So, look, everybody again needs to figure out for themselves how they're going to deal with a situation like that. Hopefully you will never encounter a situation like that. And again, I am not able to give you legal advice because I don't want you to act on what I say. You need to think about it yourself and talk to a capable lawyer. Except, if it were me, it's private property, okay? And what I would do is if somebody came rolling up my driveway, I'd say, excuse me, right? Who are you? What are you doing here? Oh, I'm a federal agent. Let me see your identification. I would be polite, right? And I would go through those steps. Do you have a warrant? Do you have a judicial warrant? Is it signed by a judge? Does it identify the person that you're looking for? And if they don't, and they probably don't, I would ask them to leave. Please leave. And if you won't leave, I am sorry, I will have to call the police because this is private property. Don't get confrontational, like, these are federal agents, as I said, but you can politely be firm about your home, okay? Here's what I would say. I don't think that you can knowingly do things to interfere. And so if you know that they're looking for somebody and they have a judicial warrant, they have the power and the authority to look for that person. And I would not do anything affirmatively to interfere with that.
This one comes from a young attendee, I think. How do we handle, but I think we're all thinking it, how do we handle the constitutional crisis and not allow Musk and Trump to be our kings?
So I've been asked what the worst thing is that I've seen. Like, what's the most horrible, awful, issue, action that we're confronted with. I think one of the most dangerous things, I previewed this earlier, that has happened in the past few weeks is the vice president's statement that judges don't have the authority to declare that an executive action is unlawful and unconstitutional. Okay. Why is it dangerous? Well, the president parroted it himself and said, he tried to quote Napoleon, I don't know if he did it accurately, but he who saves his country violates no law or something like that. Okay. But what's wrong with what the vice president said? Number one is it's wrong. Okay. Judicial review, the prerogative and right of judges to be a check and a balance and to say what the law is and to stop another branch of government or official from breaking the law has been part of our constitutional system and a bedrock of who we are as a country for 222 years. It was a seminal decision. If you don't know it, Marbury versus Madison. It's sort of complicated, but go look it up tonight, okay? But he knows because he learned it on the first day in law school, at Yale Law School, I should know. Can we rescind his diploma? But he knows that Marbury versus Madison is the law of the land. So why did he say it? Because he's the vice president. He's got this incredible platform, second only to the President of the United States. And by his utterance, he puts it into the ether and casts doubt, right, on judges and the judicial system. So that, you and I both know it's wrong, but there are people who are like, they're busy, they're, running their businesses, living their lives, they're not really paying attention, and they see it and hear it on social media, right, or Fox News or whatever, and it starts to take on a life of its own. That's the huge, social media is a big part of this. It starts to feed on itself, and then it starts to become true, right? And good people of good faith, start to question, well, wait a second, why can't the president just do it? We elected him, right? Why can't he just, because it's just, they're not lawyers, they're not constitutional scholars, And if the vice president said it, it has weight and credibility. And so what he is trying to do is undermine and destabilize judges in our legal system to set up a constitutional crisis. I started out early on saying we're on the precipice of a constitutional crisis. No, we are in one. We are in one. The good news is we're winning at the moment, okay, in court. Okay, it's going to get a lot harder when we start going up to United States Courts of Appeal.
Well, we have a good Supreme Court decision.
Well, yes, so far.
One.
Who knew I would go to bed at night praying for Amy Coney Barrett? Love that lady. So it starts to get harder as we go up, and the risk, of course. So we're in a constitutional crisis now because number one, they've undermined our legal institutions and our system of justice, but they're already not in compliance with our court orders. So in the federal funding freeze, we got a TRO right away. So we had a restraining order. They had to stop what they were doing. And on the day that I sued, the Medicaid portal for state funding was closed, and the Head Start portal was closed. What does that mean? To get federal funding, if you're a state, you go to a portal online and you put in whatever information you need to put in, and they wire you the money. And by the way, what was so wrong with Elon Musk being at Treasury? Because he got access to all the payment information about how that whole thing goes down. Like he had routing numbers and confidential information about states, which is extraordinarily dangerous because we have a lot of money, you know. So you know what's really dangerous is that they're already not compliant. We had to file a motion to enforce the court order because there were a bunch of grants, for example, for the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection that were frozen. We just filed another motion to enforce because FEMA is locked. While the Carolinas burned, by the way, okay, after California. And we're, you know, we know extreme weather events too here in Connecticut. And so very scary to have FEMA funding portals locked. So we're already in a constitutional crisis. The question, of course, and we could go down this dark rabbit hole very quickly. The question is what happens if it gets to United States Court of Appeal and he doesn't follow a court order, or if it gets to the Supreme Court and he doesn't follow a court order. The answer is we're in a very dark place, okay? And I think at that point, all of us have a responsibility to take to the streets and speak out. The other day, Lori and I had a smaller group conversation with people like all of you, and they went way off the cliff into really dark rabbit holes. And so what I said is, don't go there, okay? Don't go there, because if we go there, then we're unrecognizable as a country, and then we're having very different conversations. Focus on here, what you're going to do now. And I'll finish with this thought. There's a lot of like hand-wringing about the campaign and about our candidate and message. And I was sure she was going to win. I was positive. I was going around Connecticut and I was like, she's winning, and I guarantee it. And people were like, oh, William, you might want to. But I was sure, and then when she lost, the only way I can describe it is it's very disorienting. Everything I thought I knew is clearly not true, and I will be for a long time trying to understand why. But in this moment, stop Stop wondering about our message. You know, right now, for example, I asked Maria before we started, am I running a little too hot right now? Yeah, okay, I am running a little too hot right now, but so what? We're in a fight, okay? So stop thinking about and overthinking whether our message is just Goldilocks for this small sliver of Western Pennsylvania, and get out there and fight. Fight for each other.
I just want to thank you on behalf of everyone here for being such a first defender, for locking arms with us, for reminding us of our human bonds, and we're so lucky to have you as our commissioner. Let me just, when you're, as you're leaving, there's still some food in there, and you can sign up if you don't get our email newsletter. There are also red cards and different flyers that you can pick up for Know Your Rights. Thank you all.
They saw you out on the street there the other day at Hartford. Yes. They lost it. I couldn't hear a word, but I know you're talking.